don't you see things so often that buyers don't even consider?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Does anything come to mind?
Buyers have these rose-colored glasses of just see all the great things. You know, it's the same thing with buying a home. You're blinded by house love, I guess. So the next day, the buyer, reaches out to us and asks what happened. We tell him that unfortunately the other offers had stronger terms. And he said, oh, but I did have an appraisal waiver. And we were like, we got to double check that. Nope, it was not in the contract. The lender, he didn't even submit the offer with a pre-approval letter.
Wow.
Another story on the other side, I just am representing a buyer. Actually, you are too.
I am too?
Yes.
Okay, well, there you go.
That listing had 15 offers.
Okay. Oh, is this the one where you were not the highest price one?
That is right. Welcome to Chicago Real Estate Unfiltered. I'm Hayley Westhoff, a real estate advisor with Compass. I am here with the lovely Larry Steinway. We are going to give you a crash course and what this NAR settlement means for you. Let's just break this down for everyone so everyone can just fully understand this.
Well, I want to introduce you. You are one of the top 20 realtors in Chicago. And I know that you've been awarded the Best City Realtor 2021, 2022. I don't think 2023 has come out yet, okay, by Better Magazine, which really is a publication all about real estate and a well-received magazine. So congratulations on those awards.
Thank you.
And I look forward to future, and I know you'll get there.
Awesome. And let me introduce you, Larry Steinway. So Larry is a vice president and area sales manager for New American Funding, one of the top 10 lenders in the United States. And this is a new role, so congratulations.
New role. So let's get on the topic. What does all this mean? Okay, I get asked all the time, what's going on with the NAR settlement? And I really think it's more of a real estate agent that's doing this, that's in the weeds with all this. So what are the logistical changes that have really come from this lawsuit?
I see this as three major logistical changes. One, and probably most importantly, is just transparency. Essentially, that means a couple things. So for sellers, before we used to say, our commission is 6%, for instance, but the seller never really knew how that was broken down. Was 2% going to the buyer's agent? Was 2.5%, 3%. So now we have to decouple the listing commission to tell the seller exactly how it's broken down. I think this is awesome. I have always broken it down, but it's never been in our listing agreements. And
I've never known how many people ask me. I mean, I know now because of my experience, but so many customers say, how do they get paid?
Yeah.
And I think that's come to an end, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been confusing. And years ago, I was asking my brokerage to decouple it for a lot of reasons. But that is one logistical change. On the buyer end, there's more transparency with how commissions are paid to buyer's agents. That's been more confusing. So many buyers halfway through the transaction are like, how are you getting paid? They don't know. They don't get it.
Isn't that what brought this all about too?
Yeah, a huge part of this. Yeah. Okay. So now we are, not only having conversations and explaining it with our buyers on exactly how we get paid, but we're now having buyer agency agreements signed between buyer's agent and the buyer to not only describe what our role is in this process, that we are representing them and explaining our relationship with them, what our fiduciary responsibilities are, and it allows us to legally represent them. But it also describes commissions and how they are paid and what our commission is. So everyone is on the same page.
So when they sign, they know what they're paying for.
Exactly.
Long overdue, I have to admit a little bit.
Very long overdue.
Yeah.
Yes, these are two changes that are wonderful.
Yeah, you're embracing these changes.
I am. I don't love everything about this, but I really do think a lot of these changes were needed, and I do think that it's going to elevate our industry.
Change is always hard.
It's hard. I mean, everybody's resistant to it, but so far I've been happy with it. And commission has always been negotiable, what the seller offers the buyer's agent, etc. But this is a conversation that will just now really explain that it is negotiable and the seller can offer whatever they want to the buyer's agent.
Can I ask you a question? There's a lot of online lenders, a lot of different portals. People can click, go look at a house today. All right.
Yep.
And so does the consumer really know what they're doing when they click and go walk through that house without you?
No. The
No.
answer is no.
Okay.
So frustrating because I've been working with buyers in the past and, they told me, oh, I went to see a house this weekend. I clicked on the, schedule here and I just didn't want to bother you. I said, actually, that agent that came and showed you the property would be representing you in that transaction.
So they can't turn back time if they've gone through that house with you?
It's very hard and it's
Okay.
very complicated. But this is why this is so important. So that doesn't happen again because we have to have buyer agency discussions and buyer agency agreements now. So if they click on that button, an agent has to explain to them, I would be representing you. You need to fill out this form.
And sign it,
it's
correct?
A lot more transparent. And let me tell you a story.
Okay.
When I was living in Los Angeles way back before I got my real estate license, I was buying my first home. My agent was out of town. I clicked on that button. An agent was there. I assumed it was a listing agent. So then another agent popped up and I was like, oh, they must be, partners.
Right. Work
and
together.
then during the showing, they were asking each other questions like they didn't know each other. And I was so confused. I liked the property. I called my agent and said, I want to put an offer on this property, explained to her what happened. And she was like, oh no.
Too late?
Yeah. So
Wow.
Long story short, it didn't work out. But had I had put an offer on that property, it would have been a very bad situation.
With a complete stranger representing you that you don't
I
know.
didn't choose, that
Yeah.
that I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So yes,
Got it.
that is a great change. Another logistical change is that sellers are no longer required to offer a buyer's agent commission. But let me tell you something. Before, the rule was that they had to offer $1. Now
right.
it's $0.
All right.
So this is not an earth-shattering change.
But it's being blown up out of proportion,
Yes.
isn't it?
So sellers have always had that option. And, they've chosen not to do that because they understand that it hasn't been in their best interest. Offering a buyer's agent commission helps their property sell. So, this is not a big change.
Got it.
This will be in effect, if this all goes through, mid-July. The last logistical change is just that commissions can no longer be advertised on the MLS. Again, as of mid-July, if this all goes through. However, it can be advertised on marketing materials. It can be advertised on third-party sites. It can be advertised on all these other networks that we have. So really, it's only just the MLS that it's not going to be advertised on.
Do you think that the MLS is going to become extinct over this whole situation?
Oh my gosh, that is a very good question. Let's be honest. I mean, the commissions can't be advertised on there anymore. So agents are going to have to go through other avenues to find that. There are other portals that have these listings. So,
Are private listing networks growing because of this, do you think?
Yeah. And I do think, agents use the MLS because it has all the information that we need there. So without this pertinent piece of information, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
If a seller is saying, hey, now that I hear there's this change, I'm just going to offer half of what was industry standard. We know it's 5, 6, some places in the country I even hear 7%, but that's not our marketplace.
Correct.
But let's say it's 5, 6%. Can a seller say, you know what? I'm just going to offer 2.5%. Does that affect the marketability of that property?
Absolutely.
It does.
I'm going to give you an example.
Okay.
I have not had this conversation with all my buyers. I'm getting through them, but one in particular, I'm showing them a property on Saturday. It's the very first property that I've seen that had a lower commission than what my commission is.
What the normal
What
is.
the norm is.
Right, okay.
So we are meeting 20 minutes earlier to have this conversation. And I have to have a conversation with them that, if they like this property, the difference of the commission is going to have to be either, which we'll get into, but a closing credit or
Okay.
negotiated in.
Got it.
So yeah, that is a very uncomfortable and unfun conversation to have. And it takes the wind out of their sails a little bit. Now this house is perceived as something that they have to go through that's a little more complicated. I always say, if there were 10 identical houses and 9 of them were offering a reasonable buyer's agent commission and one of them isn't, and the buyer is going to have to step in, the contract's going to look a little different.
It's obvious. And even if it was 7 out of 10, I'm looking at the other 7 are going to be more marketable.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, it just makes the home a little less affordable for the buyer. It's in the pricing package.
Got it.
So if they have to ask for a closing credit to cover the, let's call it a $5,000 difference, that just goes into the numbers of what they can afford for the home, what they're willing to pay for the home. So I absolutely am still advising my sellers to offer a competitive buyer's broker compensation.
It's interesting that you say that. It really, because I think the perception is that they're going to save money when in the end, it really is the same. They don't save money, the buyers in this situation, nor the sellers. No one does, it seems. Am I right on that?
100%.
Hayley, the way commission is paid, is it going to look differently now? How's that going to look?
Well, it depends if the seller is offering the full buyer's agent commission, which as of today, I went on and I looked at 30 listings on the MLS this morning, and 29 of them were offering what most buyers agents are charging.
I'm seeing the same thing, by the way. I do a ton of transactions, as you know, and I'm not seeing commissions chopped. It's all the same.
I did see one, actually it's the one I'm showing.
But that's really not common. It's
not. No, it's not. So that
strong.
One was 0.25% lower. So let's talk about what happens in that case. 'Cause I think this is the part where people are really confused about. Buyers are freaking out that they're going to have to get their Venmo out.
Get their Zelle going, whatever.
To write a check or go to the ATM and get some cash out. But that's really not going to happen. So let's say that the buyer's agent commission is, let's do roundabout numbers, 1% less than what that buyer's agent is charging.
So if the buyer's agent is saying 2.5%.
Yes.
Okay. And then they go to look at a property and they're saying, we're only going to offer 1.5%. You have a 1% shortfall.
Correct. So let's say it's a $500,000 home.
Yep.
That's $5,000.
Okay.
There's a lot of different options. We could simply negotiate it in with our offer. There's an addendum now. We can write it in. Seller to pay buyer's agent 2.5% or whatever that commission is. Option number 2 is that we could ask for it in a closing credit.
Got it.
So, and I'd like you to talk on this because I know that the rules on this just changed, which is awesome.
Yeah. Basically, yes, you could raise a $500,000 home up to $505,000 and the seller gives that credit back to you.
Correct.
Okay. And that is a very, using the word benign way, as a buyer, it really doesn't impact me that much because the mortgage, the effect of it, if I'm putting 10% down, it's really only $500 out of my pocket. I'm technically only paying a small amount. Now, that's one way to do it, okay? The other way to do it is there's a new rule that came out by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that securitizes the majority of mortgages in the United States, where they're now allowing you to take this number, this credit, and move it to a different line item in the settlement statement. I don't want to get too complicated here, but when you buy a home, you are limited on the amount of credit that you can get to go towards closing costs.
Usually 3%.
Typically 3%. FHA loans are 6%. There's all different levels. But for our marketplace, we see 3% is very common.
Yes.
Okay. And actually, it's less than 3% typically because it just can't exceed what's called settlement charges. So closing costs, title, appraisal, escrows, all of these things, attorney fee, insurance, everything can be rolled in there. But the credit that the seller gives can't exceed that. So the problem was when this ruling came out is that getting a credit from the seller would limit the amount of real credit that a buyer might need. Maybe that
during inspection.
You're right. Maybe there's there's a crack in the roof.
The roof needs to be replaced and they need $20,000.
Exactly.
But they have this credit on the contract, so they can't get it. So,
exactly. They conflicted with each other. I will say it was a pretty swift response from the government agencies, the GSEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. They usually don't move this quickly. And they really did because they realized this is impacting this whole industry nationwide, right? So now that segment can be taken out of closing cost credits. So you're still going to be able to negotiate all the credits you need.
So it doesn't go towards that 3%.
Doesn't go towards the 3%.
Amazing.
That's exactly right. And I think that's significant.
When I woke up and read that article,
Some good news finally.
had a big Cheshire grin on my face because that was the news that we needed. Do you see buyers actually writing a check to their agent?
I haven't seen one yet. It's
I haven't
always
heard of
been
one.
negotiated in.
Now with this new rule, I can't see a circumstance where they would have to do that.
I haven't seen it. I think really mostly what I am seeing is I've seen a lot of people just raise the purchase price just enough to cover that.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot more of that than I have on the closing cost credit side.
Right.
We're buying the home for $610,000 and the shortfall is 1% is $6,000. So now it's $616,000
But let me ask you a question. So then it has to appraise
at that number.
So that's a little tricky.
It's not a perfect world. We've been thrust into a way to retool the industry mathematically. But I will say this, with the shortage of inventory, we know there's only 1 million homes for sale in the United States. Mm-hmm. And 5 major economists in the Wall Street Journal just said, for a normal market, do you know the number? I don't know if you know. Do you remember?
Definitely not.
It's been a while since we talked about it. 4.9 million homes for sale is a normal market. Mm-hmm. And we only have 1 million. So because of that little bump just to cover the commission, I haven't had any. And, I'm not going to, on our podcast, tell the world how many deals we're all doing, but I do enough to see on a monthly basis. It's not coming into play appraisal issues.
It's been a very, very long time since I've had an appraisal issue.
I was going to ask you, have you had any?
During the height of the pandemic, I was having issues. But and I just think just like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have caught up to this now and changed things. I think appraisers are going to end up having to kind of catch up a little bit and take that into consideration. So, I think everything will be okay. We just have to kind of all acclimate to this new world.
So sometimes a deal structure works out where actually buyer does have to pay for being represented properly. Why is that such a big deal if there's actually something significantly being done for someone to buy their most important purchase of their life? Help me with that.
This is such a foreign idea for a buyer to pay their buyer's agent.
You have to pay for doing something.
Yeah, but let's think about this. I mean, any service provider that we have, we get our hair cut, we, hire an attorney, we hire a CPA, we hire people to pave our driveway. We pay those people.
I just got my CPA bill for my taxes.
That's exactly right.
It was not free.
I think it's just because this world has worked so long this way that this new way sounds scary and foreign, but you pay people that do a service for you.
But they don't realize, I don't think, is they've always paid for it for the last 50, 60, 70 years or however it's been in place like this.
This is true.
It's just the transparency factor makes it feel more painful maybe.
Correct.
Is that
so buyers really have always inadvertently been paying their own commissions. It's been funneled through the seller, which goes to the title company and then gets dispersed from the closing
both
from the title
agents
company.
waiting for the checks, I remember.
However, it just looks a little different.
So, Hayley, you think with all this going on that buyers are going to say, you know what? I don't need an agent. I can do all of this on my own.
Unfortunately, I do. This is probably the scariest part for most agents and for myself. Is I do think this whole thing is scary. If you watch this episode, maybe you won't be as scared, but the general public, I do think, is going to hear all these media messages, think that they're going to have to pay out of pocket, which we just talked about that they most likely will not.
Yep.
And I do think that there are going to be a lot of buyers that forgo representation for a bit. So let me remind you, and for everybody else, in the early 80s, there weren't buyer's agents. We had something called sub-agency. And guess what? It was a nightmare. Tons of lawsuits. Buyers had nobody representing their interests, and it was a disaster. That's why buyer's agents were introduced. So I think we're going to have to trip and fall and go through those same motions again for people to realize the value of a good buyer's agent. And, I think once they start realizing through losing multiple offer situations because sellers don't want to work with unrepresented buyers, through deals falling apart because they don't know how to handle certain things that might come up, not getting the home of their dreams. It might sound really great at first until they fall, head over heels for a home and they don't get it. So I think that's got to happen a couple times. I think they have to have some uncomfortable situations, maybe some very uncomfortable situations happen before they say, you know what, I really need somebody to represent me. So that might be a year, maybe 2 years, but I do eventually think that buyers will kind of get the memo that using a buyer's agent for the biggest transaction of potentially in their entire life is probably a good idea.
Well, we as lenders, one of the areas where we see where it's kind of similar is when somebody wants to buy a property with an attorney, they have to be represented, by an attorney. And my father-in-law is a retired attorney, so no disrespect to attorneys. But if they're not real estate attorneys, we sometimes see that if it's a litigator or a corporate attorney, but they feel they can represent themselves, the transaction does not go well.
Yeah.
And that's where a buyer's agent, to me, they know what to do. What are the top 4 reasons as to why a buyer should use an agent? I think that we could list 40, but I really want to get, what do you think of the 4 that people listening to this want to hear?
So number 1, I think, is just the guidance and expertise so the buyer does not make a mistake. That is so crucial.
Yes, that is crucial, because don't you see things so often that buyers don't even consider?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Does anything come to mind?
Buyers have these glasses on.
Right.
These rose-colored glasses of, oh my gosh, I love the countertops and I love that backsplash is so amazing. And it's like everything I've taught them just falls out of their brain.
What does a buyer's agent catch, maybe, for example?
I mean, it's kind of like falling in love with your first boyfriend or girlfriend. You just see all the great things, you know? It's the same thing with buying a home. You're blinded by house love, I guess.
Yes.
I can confidently say that with most of my buyers, they have chosen a different home because of my guidance.
Because you find stuff that...
I find stuff. And they might hear it from the agent, but they don't really process it until I explain it. And I remind them of things like, you told me your priority was to be on a tree-lined street and you really wanted that feel of kids running around and all of that. And this is on Ashland. So I know it's new construction, but can we talk about that? Can we actually imagine, the summer and where your kids are going to ride their bikes?
Pushing that stroller down with the snow plows
but
coming.
Not just stuff like that. I mean, deferred maintenance, that's not something that buyers typically catch. HOAs with issues. And, I know buyers know to ask, what are the reserves and any special assessments, but it goes way beyond that.
Okay.
And it really does take an expert to understand if that building is operating properly and if they're going to get any surprises. So I really do think that in so many situations, my buyers have chosen different properties. And a year later, they always say, oh my gosh, Hayley, thank you for not letting me buy XYZ address because you were right. This is the right home for me.
Don't make a bad decision.
Yes.
Really is what it is.
That's
Got
huge.
it. I agree.
I mean, buying and selling is expensive. So
it's almost like you're the voice of reason, in
very
some
much
ways.
so.
What else? I mean, we talked a little bit about the private listing network. I mean, a good buyer's agent, I thought sometimes has that networking thing going. Is that true? Is that really part of it? Okay.
Yes. So
explain a little bit about
that is my number 2.
Okay.
Is access to off-market properties.
Okay.
So that's a big deal, especially now with inventory so low. They need more opportunities. I showed a house this morning that not only was not on the private listing network or some of the other networks that we have. This is totally off market,
just
not on any
just
network.
Your network.
Correct. It's not to say that my buyers are always going to buy something off market, but having those networks, and it's not just the private listing network and all of those formal networks, it's also just your agent networks. There are a lot of informal networks formed, and we share our upcoming listings that are not on any of those sites. So that's huge in any market, but especially in this market where inventory is non-existent.
I see that as a bit of a flight to quality in agent, meaning
yes.
better agents will have a bigger network,
Yes.
which means that buyer working with a better agent will have a larger opportunity. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, this is where reputation plays in. A lot of agents keep their, inventory kind of tight to their chest, but will share it with a few. That's a huge perk. 31% of our transactions last year were off market.
3 out of 10.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That really does put a heavy weight on working with a quality agent
Yes.
or a quality team, such as yourself. You have a great team, great agents. I know all of them. They're all wonderful. They really are. I deal on so many transactions that are multiple offers. And I don't think that buyers going in unrepresented, I couldn't even imagine, in my own self, I wouldn't be able to handle multiple offer situation. And I would think that as a buyer, you'd really need an advocate for yourself in that situation.
Which is my number 3.
That is your number 3.
Winning multiple offer
All right.
situations.
Well, multiple offers are huge today on every deal.
Huge.
Every deal. If there's not a multiple offer, there's a problem, right?
I will say the buyer's agent has so much to do with whether you get the property or not. It's not just about price. It is about so many other things. Is price number 1? Obviously, of course. But there are, beyond a handful, a lot of other factors, including peace of mind that it's going to get to the closing table. And only the buyer's agent can give that listing agent, who will pass it along to their sellers, that peace of mind.
If I'm a seller and I'm looking at 12 offers on my property, I think I personally would shy away from the unrepresented buyers first. Even if they were offering more money, because of the nightmare that could unfold without them knowing.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually went through my transactions in the past. I didn't do it over my whole career, but I did it over, a couple years of the unrepresented buyers. And over half fell apart.
Really? I would think only like 10%. It was more than that.
Yes. Huge number. I recently had a listing. I think we had 7 offers. One of them was unrepresented. So, they all come in very strong, mostly over asking. All the fancy
appraisal,
terms. The agents are
gap waivers,
doing everything to, make them great. And so the unrepresented buyer, he comes in 10 minutes before the deadline. His attorney sends the offer, the wrong contract. I specifically request a certain contract, and they did it on the other contract. Price was fine.
Okay.
No multiple offer terms.
What does that mean, no multiple offer terms?
Just terms that are kind of typical in a multiple offer.
No aggressive, that a buyer's agent would know to put in.
Appraisal waivers, appraisal gap addendums, all of those things.
The transaction,
yes.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
All the stuff that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, of course, that buyer did not. In fact, of all the bunch, that was probably the most unattractive offer of the bunch. Wow. The prices were all kind of similar. There wasn't a huge difference. So the next day, the buyer, reaches out to us and asks what happened. We tell him that unfortunately the other offers had stronger terms. And he said, but I did have an appraisal waiver. And we were like, we got to double check that. Nope, it was not in the contract. The lender, he didn't even submit the offer with a pre-approval letter.
Wow.
Yeah,
that one was just like not
off the
happening.
Table. And another story on the other side, I just am representing a buyer. Actually, you are too.
I am too?
Yes.
Okay, well, there you go.
That listing had 15 offers.
Okay. Oh, is this the one where you were not the highest priced one?
That is right. There was an offer.
I said it was because of me, and you said that's not why it happened.
It was because of our persistence. It was because they knew, we gave them all the comfort in the world that
reputation.
We were going to close. So yeah, they chose us.
Wow.
So last but not least, number 4 is saving money.
I like that. If you could just help my wife learn that topic.
Yes, and I know people think if I don't use a buyer's agent, I'm going to save money. But as the saying goes, actually, I think it's a little different. It's sometimes you have to spend money to save money.
All right, there's a twist. So what do you mean by that? Okay, because it's normally spend money to make money, but you said spend money to save money.
Yes.
Okay.
So a buyer's agent is going to help you save money. There are 100 reasons out there, but essentially a true expert It has to be a good buyer's agent. People out there are like, use a buyer's agent, use a buyer's agent. No, it's use a really good buyer's agent.
Okay.
And if you do use a really good buyer's agent, they are going to save you money. I'll give you an example. Working with a buyer right now. We're looking at high rises downtown, about to put in an offer. I asked the question, have they done the risers? Something that my client had never heard of, something that actually most agents don't know about.
What is that?
It's not a fun thing. It's just the plumbing stack.
Have they done the plumbing?
A lot of these old 60s and 70s buildings, they last about, 50 to 60 years. So
totally get it.
And
it's not glamorous, by the way.
No, this is the non-glamorous part of my job.
But it's an important question. I would never think to ask that, by the way. Never.
But we found out that it will need to be done in probably the next 2 years, and it's going to cost between $60,000 and $80,000 per unit.
So this is like a multi-million-dollar project.
Yes.
And it's coming down the road.
So had I not asked that question, she would be in contract on that place.
And get a notice a year and a half down the road. Oh, by the way, you have 12 months to pay us $50,000, $60,000, $80,000. That's cool that you found that example in this.
Yeah,
this is great.
And if I look at every transaction, there's always something that I brought to their attention or I asked or I dwelled on and continued to find out more and more and more. Maybe I advise them to not move forward with the transaction because of it.
So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Spending money on you to represent a buyer, there it is, right? Is that spending money to save money? I love that.
Yes.
I really do. That is awesome.
And, even in negotiations, I know right now there's not much of a negotiating environment out there because everything's multiple offers, but there's still an element of not having to go to that absolute top. It's, it hasn't happened recently because the market is so bananas. But
I feel there's an intensity to it right now. Even though you're not negotiating, there's an intensity if you're a great buyer's agent, all your ducks are in a row.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing the winners get.
Yes.
Which I know the way you run your team.
Those are the winners.
Yeah.
So, I truly do think that a buyer will end up saving money in the long run. They might not see that up front. They might not see that on the closing statement. But all of the things that are brought to their attention, all of the maybe advising to not move forward with that property, those things that will end up saving them money.
Great point.
And not making a bad decision and having to move 2 years later.
That's exactly right, which is why it even goes to the number one reason, which is not making a bad purchase.
Correct. All right, Larry, I have a question for you.
All right.
I'm curious.
Okay.
So when a buyer is unrepresented, how does that affect you on the lending side? Like, what is your experience with that?
I don't see it that often. And I can tell you that those are the transactions that resonate as being cumbersome, that deadlines aren't met. The buyers are in a situation where they're saying, well, I didn't know I had to do that, or I didn't know that it was due by that time. There were so many times I would get those phone calls and say, if you had an agent, this wouldn't happen. So I think that fortunately, most people see the value in being well represented.
Yeah.
Again, I go back to which this whole thing for me, this whole conversation is about. And I say this to people sometimes. How often in your life do you buy something that's $750,000 or $500,000 or even a small $250,000 place? How often do you go buy a $250,000 something? So, doesn't that really kind of sum up what a point we're trying to make here?
Absolutely.
That's really what I take away from all this is I've actually learned something today, Hayley. I really have. We've learned how important this topic is.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I'm glad we got to talk about this because I do think there's a lot of confusion. And at the end of the day, yes, this has changed, but I really, truly do think good things will come from this. It's going to elevate our industry. I do think it is going to be tough for newer agents to navigate this. And potentially, I know a lot of articles out there are saying, 60 to 80% of agents are going to leave the industry.
I don't know if that's the number.
That's probably a little high. I
do
think that this world is becoming, it's just more and more important now that agents are truly good at what they do because they're going to be interviewed more by buyers. And that did not happen before. I am happy about this. I know that's not going to be a popular view, but am I happy about every single thing? No. Am I excited to have buyer agent agreements? No. But overall, holistically, I think this is a good thing and good things will come. Thanks for watching. Again, I'm Hayley Westhoff, a Chicago real estate agent. And if you want more information on this NAR settlement, feel free to reach out to me, phone number below. Follow me on social. And if you're also looking to buy or sell a home, I'm happy to help with that as well.